You can have you.
Main event of the evening.
Ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we will be discussing Season 5, Episode 26, Rules to Date By.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Rules to Date By.
We open with Richie's unnamed band performing Happy Birthday Sweet 16 at a dance at Arnold's.
I can't believe my eyes, you're just a teenage dream. Happy birthday, sweet 16.
When they finish, Al makes an announcement. For the next 2 weeks, Arnold's will be closed because Al is going to California to visit his cousin Josephine.
She's the one who introduced me to Rosa Coletti.
But if anyone wants to have some fun that weekend, Leather Tuscadero and the Suedes will be performing at the Blue Ox Inn, about 80 miles north on Highway 41. Richie adds that his unnamed band will be backing the Suedes up, but nobody seems particularly excited, possibly because they still don't have a name yet. Ralph and Potsy pack up the instruments, while Richie goes to talk to Lori Beth, who is laughing with another guy. He asks her to dance, and she says she's tired. Richie accuses her of dancing with every guy in the place.
You said I could dance while you played?
Yeah, I said you could dance, but not with a partner.
Then Lori Beth excuses herself to go talk to Herbie Root. He broke up with Lynn, and Lori Beth promised her she'd talk to him. Back at the Cunningham house, Marion is introducing Joni to a book she's been reading, The Feminine Mystique.
You know, Joni, men have been taking advantage of us for too long now.
Huh, you're telling me.
Joni, whose politics mostly revolve around getting boys to pay for her sodas, is less enthused. Richie arrives as Joni leaves, and Marion tells him Lori Beth called, and Marion agrees with her that Richie is being a stinker. Howard shows up as Richie complains that Lori Beth is being too friendly to other guys, and Marion cites the feminine mystique. It's Lori Beth's life, and she isn't Richie's puppet. Meanwhile, Howard is getting progressively more annoyed at Marion for not having dinner ready, and she chews him out for not respecting the labor she does around the house.
After I fix your breakfast in the morning, who do you think clears the table and washes the dishes and irons your shirts? And then starts all over again so she can have dinner for you when you come home from hanging around the hardware store all day. Who, Howard? Who?
The studio audience goes wild for it, as they should, and Howard agrees with Marion that they should go out to eat. That weekend, the band and Fonzie are getting ready to depart from Arnold's to the Blue Ox Inn. Lori Beth shows up late, to Richie's consternation, because she was helping Jean-Pierre from her modern dance class with his tour jetés. That doesn't make Richie feel better, especially once he finds out Jean-Pierre was helping Lori Beth with her leg exercises.
After class, leg touching does not count as dancing.
Richie thinks that one day, Lori Beth will run into a guy who thinks her friendliness is a come-on. Lori Beth calls him strange, and Richie says he's sick. Sick and tired of Lori Beth making friends with every guy who walks through the door. Lori Beth says if Richie's going to hate that she has male friends, maybe they shouldn't go out anymore. Richie says that suits him just fine. Lori Beth still wants to go to the Blue Ox Inn. They've both been looking forward to this for a while. So they agree to both go and have a good time, separately. The band arrives at the Blue Ox Inn, a pleasantly rustic place, where most of the clientele appear to be lumberjacks. Richie and Lori Beth are still fighting.
I was hot.
Well, I was cold.
Well, how could you be cold when the window was only open an inch?
And Lori Beth saying hi to some men there doesn't help. Fonzie State Blossom asks him to do something about the bickering exes, but Fonzie prefers to not get involved in the battle of the sexes, instead taking Blossom outside for a walk. Leather greets the band.
Hey, you made it.
Yeah?
For a while, though, I thought you got lost or something.
Well, we would have made it sooner, but the Huskies couldn't pull the car.
And explains she's doing this gig as a favor to an old reform school friend working in the inn's kitchen. Everyone goes to eat, except for Richie and Lori Beth. Lori Beth helps a lumberjack remove a splinter from his hand, then takes him to the kitchen to clean it. Richie, as he has been for most of this episode, is a pissy little baby about it.
Do you really have to do this?
That night, Leather, the Suedes, and the unnamed band perform Johnny Be Good. Afterwards, Ralph, Potsy, and Chachi head home in Ralph's car, while Richie tries to call a tow truck for his own car, which is broken down. Lori Beth comes inside and tells Richie to pretend they're together, as the lumberjack she was nice to earlier comes inside. Lori Beth reveals he told her he wants to pull her through the snow by her hair, and the lumberjack picks Lori Beth up under his arm.
Come on outside, little lady. You and me got some fun to do.
Richie tells him to put Lori Beth down, or else, bucko, because you can't go around picking up other people's girls. The problem is not that he's making Lori Beth feel unsafe and physically threatening her. The problem is just that he's doing it to someone who already has a boyfriend. I hate you, Richie. The lumberjack is about to kick Richie's ass when Fonzie shows up. Fonzie, not really wanting to pick a fight with a guy over a foot taller than him,
You picked a fight with a red and black tree?
manages to talk the guy into going outside to look at blue jays to relax. Richie soon follows to help Fonzie wild the lumberjack.
See, Fonzie's gonna lure that guy out into the snow. He's gonna say, "Here, look at the blue jay." The guy's gonna look up and then whack, whoop, fa!
Later, Fonzie and the lumberjack come back inside. The lumberjack is carrying a beautiful ice glow with him, amazed by its natural beauty. Lori Beth and Richie come back in, bickering about Richie's attempt to jump on the lumberjack's back. Fonzie interrupts them, telling Lori Beth to be more careful about who she befriends, and Richie to let Lori Beth have male friends. At Fonzie's behest, they kiss and make up. Back at the Cunningham house, Joni asks to borrow Marion's copy of The Feminine Mystique for Jenny Piccolo.
Can, Jenny borrow your feminine mystique book?
No.
Oh, Dad, don't be such a prude.
Howard says no, and tells Marion he wishes she had never read that silly book. Marion says it's not silly. It's about how women have rights. Howard says he took Marion out to dinner. What more does she want? She whispers in his ear, and he's surprised.
Oh, come on, Marion. We haven't done that in a long time.
They embrace, and then speed outside to the ice cream parlor.
Thank you, Peter. That was Rules to Date By, which first aired back on May 23rd, 1978. On that night, Happy Days served as the lead into a brand new Laverne and Shirley, in which the girls helped Carmine get his own dance studio started.
Now that boy is much older. He got his own dance studio.
NBC aired a made-for-TV movie called The Many Loves of Arthur, starring Richard Macer as a zoo veterinarian looking for love.
Wow.
With a stewardess played by Caroline McWilliams, and CBS was showing part one of The Yearling, the classic 1946 family film about a lonely boy and a deer.
The famous story of a boy named Jody, a baby deer, and a big, beautiful land. The Yearling.
Based on the immensely popular 1938 novel by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. So, Peter, what are you watching out of those three?
I'm watching The Many Loves of Arthur. I want to see that zoo veterinarian find love.
To me, it has all the earmarks of an unsold pilot that they tried to get a series going about a zoo veterinarian. Yeah, I probably would check that out just out of curiosity.
The Many Loves of Arthur. He's a veterinarian.
What if I never love another human being?
And she's a stewardess.
There's a lot we don't know about each other.
But it took a pregnant hippo to bring them together.
Everything is possible.
Rules to Date By was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Joe Glauberg. We've covered many of Joe's episodes on this podcast. The most recent that we talked about was My Favorite Orkin. As for guest stars this week, well, naturally, we have the return of Susie Quattro as Leather Tuscadero.
They wanted a particular person, I was told, after I joined the show, that could be tough and could be soft and could play and sing and act. So here I am.
Jan and Jill Bunker are playing the Swades for the second and final time. We saw them previously in Marion's Misgivings. Again, they were real-life sisters who had their own singing act in the 1970s. Peter, did you have any thoughts on Susie Quattro or Jan and Jill?
I think that Susie Quattro is getting progressively more and more comfortable on screen. And in this episode, even though she's only in it for like 2 scenes, and one of those scenes is just her performing Johnny Be Good, she's a welcome presence in this episode, and she makes me hate it slightly less.
Yeah, I thought Susie Quattro was actually one of the stronger parts of this episode. Unfortunately, Jan and Jill got the lamest send-off they could possibly get. I don't know that they actually ever speak or even sing in the episode that I saw. They do some awful choreography behind Susie Quattro during the song.
Yeah, whoever is doing Leather and the Suede's choreography is not doing a good job in this episode.
By the way, their characters, I think, are called Millie and Tilly.
Yes.
And Susie Quattro says that they're in the kitchen making chili.
And where are the Swades?
Well, Millie and Tilly?
Yeah.
They're in the kitchen making chili.
And I thought that was just a joke. Millie and Tilly are making chili, but then they go off to eat the chili?
Yeah.
In addition to being the background singers for this performance, are they also cooking?
I guess.
I thought that was the stupidest thing. Another returnee is Shirley Kirkus as Blossom. This is her second appearance as the character, and it won't be her last. Again, she was a dancer who was also a regular on Blansky's Beauties. We first saw Blossom in Joni's First Kiss. Any thoughts on Shirley Kirkus as Blossom?
Not really. I mean, I certainly related to her because she was also deeply annoyed at Richie and Lori Beth in this episode.
The art's going to do anything about those two?
mostly at Richie, but maybe that's just me projecting.
I barely noticed her in this. They brought her on to play Blossom again. So far, Blossom's been on twice, and they really haven't given her a personality. They did mention that she's still working at Happy Harry's Hutch, which I assume is a sort of Playboy Club type establishment where they dress as bunny rabbits.
Though you once were the best bunny at the Playboy Club, you're getting to be a rabbit with me.
Our main guest star of the week is Ben Davidson as Oak Tree. Ben was a Los Angeles actor who appeared in TV and film from the 70s to the 90s, often playing bouncers, athletes, and various tough guys. Early in his career, he was paid $500 to play the doorman in the pioneering porn film Behind the Green Door.
You've been here before, Clark. You know the rules. And tell them to your buddy, too.
His other movies include MASH, Conan the Barbarian, Cracking Up with Jerry Lewis, and Necessary Roughness. On TV, he was a regular on Code R and Ball 4, and he guest starred on Charlie's Angels, 8 is Enough, Fantasy Island, Dukes of Hazzard, and much, much more. Ben died in 2012. So, Peter, what did you think of Ben Davidson as Oak Tree?
He threatens to drag Lori Beth through the snow by her hair because she turned down his romantic advances. I don't think that's Ben Davidson's fault. He's just playing the character as written, but man, wow.
Do you think that's something he actually said to another human being?
I mean, he certainly gave Lori Beth reason to believe that he was going to do that. And then he physically picks her up and puts her under his arm like she's a cat or something.
Oh, yeah. He manhandles her pretty badly at the end of this episode. Toward the end, they try to make him sort of like Mongo from Blazing Saddles, where he's this giant guy, but he's got kind of a childlike innocence because he's very taken with this icicle that Fonzie shows him, and then he goes off to melt the icicle.
Boy, look at this little Dickens. Isn't it beautiful?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe he's going to freeze the icicle again and then melt it again?
Yeah, that was his plan. And I think he's supposed to make him charming, but he just made me wildly uncomfortable.
I think it's due to the writing. I don't think it has anything to do with Ben Davidson. I think Ben was just cast because he's this gigantic guy with this lumberjack mustache.
He is very, very tall.
Songs this week, well, we have Happy Birthday, Sweet 16, performed by Anson Williams. It was originally a number 6 hit for Neil Sedaka in 1961.
Some would say he could fly, some would say he could swim, others say he could sing like Neil Sedaka.
So I guess we're in 1961 at least. And we have Johnny Be Good, performed by Susie Quattro, but this has been removed for copyright reasons from my version of the episode and replaced with a generic instrumental that makes the scene incredibly stupid. They're just jumping around on stage to generic 50s music.
And nobody is saying anything?
No, not at all.
Oh, wow.
As for cultural and historical references, most of this episode takes place at the Blue Ox Inn.
Leather Tuscadero and the Suedes will be appearing at the Blue Ox Inn. Now that's about 80 miles north on Highway 41. Thank you.
There really was a Blue Ox Inn in Wisconsin, and you really could get there by traveling north by Highway 41, just like the episode suggests. It was a family restaurant in Eagle River, that's near the Michigan-Wisconsin border, and it was about 270 miles away from Milwaukee, not 80 miles as Al suggests. Also known as Babe's Blue Ox Inn. It was one of those places where if you could eat a 32-ounce steak in one sitting, it was free.
Oh, wow. Do you think they paid to be featured in this episode?
I don't, because the Blue Ox Inn seemed to be long gone by the 70s. It was a place that people remembered from the early 60s. So I think it was just a memory that people had of Wisconsin was going to the Blue Ox Inn. But the real place was a family restaurant. It wasn't like a lumberjack bar where fights were breaking out all the time.
Good point.
Babe the Blue Ox is a character from American folklore, the constant companion of the giant lumberjack Paul Bunyan.
Homer Paul Bunyan, Babe the Blue Ox.
Babe the Blue Ox.
Those characters can be traced back to the oral tradition of North American loggers of the 1800s. Paul Bunyan first started appearing in print in the 1890s and then was popularized by a pamphlet in 1916. And since that pamphlet was put out by a logging company, he is sometimes considered an advertising character rather than genuine folklore. You know what the name for that is? They call it
lore?
Fake lore. I had never heard that term. So,
oh, yeah. Apparently Pecos Bill is also fake lore because he was introduced in a 1923 novel.
Really? And he doesn't really go back to the Wild West?
Right.
Richie says that they're not going to Yellowstone Park. This is a giant national park that spans 3 different states. Most of it is in Wyoming. Both the Mouths and the Cunninghams have vacation there. Joni asks Marion if she's reading Peyton Place. This was the scandalous 1956 novel by Grace Metalius about the goings-on in a small New England town. It was made into a successful film in 1957.
Here is Constance Mackenzie, as played by Lana Turner. Selena Cross, played by Hope Lang. Michael Rossi, played by Lee Phillips. Doc Swain, played by Lloyd Nolan. Allison Mackenzie, played by the most amazing star discovery of the year, Diane Barcy.
And an even more successful TV show in 1964. In the 1950s, it was considered pretty hot stuff, the 50 Shades of its day. But the main pop culture reference of the week is that Marion is reading The Feminine Mystique, a landmark 1963 book by Betty Friedan.
But did you ever intend, in the very beginning in 1963, that your writing would cause a revolution and have the effect it did?
No, not consciously. I would have been terrified. I merely was writing a book, and yet underneath, it's strange. There was this sense of urgency and importance, as if perhaps a part of me knew. If I thought about things like destiny, I would think that there was something there.
Betty Friedan started working on this book after she attended a college reunion and found that her female classmates were now dissatisfied with their lives of domesticity. The title refers to the idea that women are expected to be fulfilled with marriage and children rather than careers outside the home. Marion specifically cites Chapter 8.
It's Chapter 8.
Which I found. It's called The Mistaken Choice, and it says that women made a mistake in choosing to return to domestic life after World War II.
The Feminine Mystique came out in 1963, so I guess this episode would have to take place in 1963?
I guess so. We had a 1961 song already, and then the book is from 1963. And if you look at Marion's copy of The Feminine Mystique, it is not new. It is really faded by the sun on the spine and the front cover. So it's been around for quite a long time. I don't know when this episode is taking place.
Maybe it just takes place in an alternate history where The Feminine Mystique came out a few years earlier. So I guess the history of feminism within the Happy Days universe is radically different from ours. Maybe not radically different, but somewhat different, slightly different.
Joyce Kilmer gets referenced. Alfred Joyce Kilmer was an American poet from New Jersey who wrote for about a decade, yet is remembered almost solely for a brief poem called Trees from 1913. He was killed by a German sniper during World War I, just 5 years after writing that poem. Fonzie misquotes him slightly.
I don't think I will ever see nothing quite as beautiful as a tree.
The actual poem goes,
I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree.
Lori Beth uses some more dance terminology this week. A tour jeté is a high turning leap through the air, and a rond de jambe is a circular leg movement. Log cabin syrup is now sold in boring-looking plastic bottles, but it used to be sold in tins shaped like little log cabins.
There's nothing like that real maple flavor of log cabin syrup to bring out the extra goodness of French toast or your favorite pudding.
It's been on the market since 1887. The tin design has changed over the years. In the 1950s, the tin actually depicted a mother standing in the doorway of the cabin looking out at her children, which may be why this packaging appealed so much to Fonzie.
It's a log cabin, just like my syrup can.
Smokey Bear has been the mascot of the U.S. Forest Service since 1950. He's often called Smokey the Bear because of the song.
Oh yeah? Who's your friend, Smokey the Bear?
But the Forest Service insists it's just Smokey Bear, and they kind of get pissy about it. Under any name, Smokey is famous for his catchphrase, "Only you can prevent forest fires." Florence Nightingale, who was born into a wealthy English family in 1820, virtually invented the nursing profession, which is why her name is still synonymous with nursing today.
Who do you think you are, Florence Nightingale?
She was famous for tending to soldiers during the Crimean War. Perhaps influenced by this episode, axe throwing has become surprisingly popular, even removed from lumberjack competitions. There are commercial locations across America where people can compete in axe throwing. Here in the Chicago area alone, there is the Backyard Axe Throwing League and the Axplosion Throwing Lounge.
Hey guys, my name is Coach Adrian, and today we're going to be going into the basics on how to throw an axe and what we teach here at Axplosion. To begin, what you're always going to want to do is you're going to want to place your dominant hand at the very, very bottom of your axe handle and cup with your less dominant one hand right on top of the other.
Now, I completely misinterpreted this when I saw the episode. I thought the joke was that this was such a tough bar that instead of throwing darts, they were throwing axes. But actually, axe throwing is a whole thing. The blue jay really does have a shrill, squeaky call like the one that Fonz imitates. I actually tracked down blue jay noises for this, and they are not pleasant. The blue jay makes a horrible noise. And Forever Amber is a historical romance novel from 1944. It was written by Kathleen Winsor. At the time of its publication, it was condemned as indecent by the Catholic Church, which ironically helped it become the top-selling novel of the 1940s.
She's already read Forever Amber anyways.
For the record, Kathleen said that her publisher took out all the sexy parts before the book was even printed. We got this whole crash course in scandalous literature. We've talked about Peyton Place, The Feminine Mystique, and Forever Amber, all the stuff that people would be hiding under their beds from their parents. We don't even have that anymore because everything is available to everyone, everywhere, all the time. So you don't have that experience of hiding away the forbidden books anymore. Other observations, we see the semester break bash at Arnold's. So can I assume this is the break between the fall and the winter semesters, like mid to late December?
I would assume so.
When you review every episode of a TV show like we do, you really start to notice when items of clothing are repeated. I've already talked about Joni's famous red beret, which shows up in this episode, but I'd like to add to the Hall of Fame Marion's ruffly blue blouse and Lori Beth's peach sweater with matching scarf. They're all in this episode. Richie is again written as a jerk in this episode like he was in Richie's Girl Exposes the Cunninghams. I've noticed that whenever he and Lori Beth argue, it's usually over nothing. Like it's I really don't like when he's written that way. They wrote him as a jerk in Richie's Girl Exposes the Cunninghams, and I thought maybe that's just for 1 week. And then here we are, just a couple episodes later, it is written even worse.
This might be Richie at his most obnoxious, and he's been pretty obnoxious in the past. Remember when he went to the prom with Arlene back in season 1, and he got annoyed at her for dancing with guys who weren't him, despite the fact that at that time they were not dating?
I guess there's a sort of jealous, possessive side of his personality. In this, he's really getting mad over nothing. They're just writing him like a jerk just to keep the story going, which I didn't care for. But I did like the way Fonzie was depicted. Fonzie doesn't show up until the 9-minute mark of this episode, which is unusual for Happy Days at this time. But I like how he's written as weird and nervous and kind of paranoid in this episode.
What's happening to me? You see that? I'm all tensed up and everything like that. It's because I play with too many small motors.
It's like they're experimenting with the Fonzie character. Mm-hmm. That was very amusing to me. I'd never seen him act this way. There's some weird, funny Fonzie stuff in this episode. And Linda Goodfriend takes a pretty decent fall when Oak Tree drops her. So that lady was a good sport because I would not have done that. Mm-hmm. He picks her up and Ben Davidson does not put her down gently. He basically throws her to the ground. So I will ask, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Lots of flannel, lots of lumberjack chic, and that looked very nice. We also have the return of Leather's rock and roll jumpsuit, which I liked.
Yeah, she looked real cool in that jumpsuit. So I will ask you, Peter, was this episode any good?
I hated this episode. I really hated it. And mostly it comes down to the fact that it basically blames Lori Beth for Oak Tree being creepy to her because she was friendly to him. And apparently, if a woman is friendly to a man and he interprets that as romantic, then it's the woman's fault for being friendly. That's the kind of thing that women have to think about all the time because there are a lot of men who do not know how to interact with women except within a romantic context. But that's not women's fault. That's men's fault for not being willing to try and understand things. And it's really gross that this episode kind of blames Lori Beth for that.
You know what it kind of reminded me of a little bit was Joni's weird boyfriend.
Yeah.
Because one of the morals of that episode was that Joni, at least to Fonzie's estimation, was kind of asking for it by dressing a certain way. And that is often given as an excuse to treat women in a certain way because they're dressed in a certain way. So that was kind of a disturbing message in that episode. And then this one really turns that up because we have poor Lori Beth, who just takes the splinter out of the guy's finger, being victimized and harassed, and they're far from home. They're in a location where it would be very difficult to reach a safe place. Obviously, the Blue Ox Inn is not a safe location because that's where all the lumberjacks are. That's where Oak Tree hangs out all the time. It's a very upsetting episode for that reason. Part of it is also the Blue Ox Inn. It's a very frightening place if you're there from way, way, way out of town. And suddenly there's this guy who's pursuing you and threatening to pull you through the woods by your hair. And then for Lori Beth to get blamed partially for that, I thought was absolutely ridiculous. I thought Richie was treating her horribly for the rest of the episode. This was not really a fun one at all. This is a very uncomfortable episode, and I think it's one that maybe people should see because it gives you some insight into the gender politics of the 1970s. The Feminine Mystique came out in 1963, and now we are here 15 years later, and where are male-female relationships 15 years after the feminine mystique. I guess as a bit of history, it's good to see because you get to see what women had to go through at that time. But as a comedy, no, I don't think it really worked very well at all. I guess I like Susie Quattro in it.
I really liked the subplot of Marion's political awakening. I wish that had been what the episode was about. Like the scene where she tells off Howard for not thinking about all of the labor that she does every day to keep the household running. Like, that was great.
It seemed like they set up a pretty good Howard and Marion story and then didn't really do it, which was kind of a shame. They really have a great setup here. Marion reads the feminine mystique, and then suddenly she starts realizing how much work she puts into this house and how little Howard appreciates it, and they have to renegotiate or something. But they kind of abandon that and just go off to the Blue Ox Inn and have that story take off. So unfortunately, the best part of this episode is relegated to a subplot. I'm going to say this was a misfire for Happy Days. Interesting as a historical curio, very disturbing as an episode of comedy.
Yeah.
So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, it's the season 5 finale, where Fonzie does his best, juror number 8, to defend a young man accused of robbery in Fonzie for the Defense.
Wow, season 5 finale. Sounds like a big one, so see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
For final number, Leather Tuscadero.
Back up in the woods among the evergreens, stood an old cabin made of earth and wood. Where lived a country boy named Johnny B. Good, who never ever learned to read or write so well, but he could play a guitar just like a ring and a bell. Go, 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 Johnny, go, go.
After class, leg touching does not count as dancing.